This video is brought to you by Cook Unity. I have some bad news. We are only getting older, which is why I had to make this video before it ended up being 6 hours long. These are the best movies of every year I've been alive. Big thank you to Aaron505 for suggesting this video idea. You should like this video. Let's see what happens. And without any further ado, I don't know if I've ever killed the vibe faster than I am right now. Usually I like to ease into talking about Taste of Cherry, a movie about a man who drives around town looking for someone to bury him after he kills himself, but this list has forced me to jump right into it. Yes, my favorite film from the year I was brought into this world happens to be about a man who is trying to get out of it. The first Iranian film to win the Palme d'Or, Taste of Cherry is by far my favorite example of who Abbas Kiarostami is as a filmmaker. Not only do I consider him one of the most visually refined filmmakers, he might just be the master of wide shots, but I also find his work incredibly moving, Taste of Cherry being the clearest example. Yes, this is heavy subject matter, but the film is relatively light on its feet. It's natural and subdued, which is refreshing to see for a film about such a subject. You can both feel for this man, but also fall in love with the world by the end of it. Pretty powerful stuff. My runner-up for 1997 is Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke. Directed by legendary auteur Tsai-Ming Liang, The Whole tells the story of a man and woman who find connection while in quarantine. Yes, and it came out in 1998. I'll never know if this would have hit the same had I not seen it after the COVID lockdown, but I can't sit here and lie like that doesn't play a massive part in how much I enjoyed this. Tsai's signature slow and sensual approach to filmmaking has never worked better than it does here. Keep in mind there are a handful of his classics I still haven't seen. That sense of desire is just oozing out of this thing. There's so much texture in every shot, such attention towards how the actors move around the space. For being a movie about quarantine, damn is it horny. And it's a musical, by the way, which works way more than it should. Quarantine does get weird like that, doesn't it? And my runner-up for 1998 is Thomas Vinterberg's The Celebration. It's one of 3 Thomas Vinterberg films in this video. Basically, he cooked. Which reminds me of this week's sponsor, Cook Unity. Cook Unity is the first chef-to-consumer platform delivering freshly prepared, pre-selected meals right to your door weekly. With Cook Unity, you can select from more than 350 chef-created meals each week using over 7 different dietary preference filters. We're talking about chefs who are Food Network alums, James Beard Award winners, and acclaimed restaurateurs. Meals are delivered fully cooked, so all you have to do is heat them up and you're ready to eat. You guys know me, I'm always running around, and that's why Cook Unity is perfect for when I don't have a ton of time to figure out a meal, but still want something fulfilling and healthy. Their meals hit perfectly after a good bouldering session. Some personal favorites so far include the Fettuccine Chipotle Alfredo with chicken by Chef Roberto Vergara, the Mission-style beef burrito by Chef Jose Garces, my personal favorite, the Al Pastor chicken bowl by Chef Andres Mendez. That chicken bowl specifically is very tasty. I love a good bowl. And that's my favorite part about Cook Unity. The food is good. I'm from Chicago. Trust me, I'm very picky when it comes to food, and I can safely say the chefs over at Cook Unity know what they're doing. Not to mention the amount of variety. Like I mentioned, Cook Unity has dozens of chefs offering a wide variety of cuisines. There are more than 350 meals to choose from each week. And if you can't decide, Cook Unity is happy to select meals for you based on your preferences. Cook Unity chefs offer up a wide range of meals with over 7 different dietary preference filters, including vegan, paleo, and gluten-free options. As someone with a nut allergy, they also accommodate for that, which is always very nice. And menus are updated weekly. New chefs are always joining the team, so you'll always find new favorite meals to choose from. The subscription is super flexible, and you can pause, skip weeks, or cancel at any time. Go to cookunity.com/Karsten50 or click the link in the description and use my code Karsten50 to get 50% off your first order of Cook Unity meals to try them out for yourself. 1999 was one hell of a year for film. Let's list them off. All About My Mother, Beau Travail, Fight Club, The Matrix, American Beauty, The Iron Giant. Yet when I look out at this list of films, I can't deny my love for Election. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. Election, directed by Alexander Payne, tells the story of Tracy Flick, a straight-A student running for her student election, and what happens when a teacher at the school does everything in his limited power to stop her from winning. The film is, at its core, just a really good comedy. That's what got me to fall in love with it. It's led by 3 pitch-perfect performances from Reese Witherspoon, Matthew Broderick, and Chris Klein. God damn, is Chris Klein good in this. That is reason enough to love it. But I also think the film, like a lot of Payne's other work, nails a specific kind of patheticness unique to that generation of middle-aged American men. It's a group that thinks as though the world was unfair to them, but who have more influence on their close circles than they realize, and abuse that power in self-destructive ways. You see this in all of his most iconic work, especially Sideways, and in some ways The Holdovers. An Election is one of the most straightforward and hilarious examples of that trait. My runner-up for 1999 has to be The Matrix. It makes so much sense for some reason that EE is the film to kick off the century, a film about, well, everything, just feels perfect for such a bold year. EE, directed by Edward Yang, tells the story of a family living in Taipei from the perspective of each family member. I've seen it twice now, and the second time felt completely different than it did the first time, which I mean as a compliment. He masters so many different perspectives and backgrounds that it makes sense why the film would hit a certain way when I was a 22-year-old in the midst of film school, and a different way as a 26-year-old man who is just trying to get to the end of the day at this point. It's funny, it's sad, it's hopeful, it's even a little tense here and there. Again, it's literally everything. I know there are other Edward Yang films I gotta dive into, but this is one I'm just gonna keep revisiting forever, just to keep checking in with myself through it. In case this needs more praise, this is my pick for what I would show an alien if it came down to Earth. You learn about everything you need to know about people through this movie. If you can't tell with the kind of weight that I've placed on this thing, I couldn't not call it the best of that year. My runner-up for 2000 is In the Mood for Love. In 2001, David Lynch released what is, in my opinion, his magnum opus, Mulholland Drive. Originally intended to be a pilot for a TV show, Mulholland Drive tells the story of an aspiring actress who moves to Hollywood and proceeds to have one crazy experience. When I think about what I love about David Lynch, I realize it's basically all in Mulholland Drive, and it's the best example of his signature traits. The humor is there, the eroticism is there, the sound is there, Billy Ray Cyrus is there, the nightmares are there. You could argue that there have been more nightmarish examples throughout his filmography, but I don't think it's ever worked as harmoniously with his other traits as well as it does here. And I don't mean to say that the only reason I love this is because it's the most David Lynch movie possible. I don't mean to imply that you gotta see the rest of them to understand why this is so great, although I will say, does help, because it is an incredibly strong film on its own. A strong film about trauma, fame, the industry, and dreams. My runner-up for 2001 has gotta be Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away. In 2002, Paul Thomas Anderson became the filmmaker we know him as today. I feel like that's going to go over poorly, but when you look at his filmography, Punch Drunk Love really was, at the time, a detour from his usual work. It was weirder, more personal, and a lot more intense. It was significantly shorter than his last few films, but it packed a much bigger punch in my opinion. On what was probably my 10th rewatch of this film, I noticed just how modern it all was. The angles he chooses, the abstract score, I hate to use this word, but the quirkiness of it, the social awkwardness. That's what I should say. That's probably the most important part. My point is, it's a film that could come out today looking exactly like this and work just as well. I have no evidence at all to back this up, but I feel like the younger generation really digs this. I can see the influence in the air. And how could you not? It's one of the most unique romantic comedies ever made. I do think the way the music and the cinematography work together gives it a monstrous feeling. It makes falling in love feel as overwhelming as it should feel. Everything about it feels out of control and on the verge of falling apart, and I love that about it. It's an electric experience I'll never get tired of watching. My runner-up for 2002 is Adaptation. Park Chan-wook's masterpiece Old Boy tells the story of a man who seeks revenge after being imprisoned for 15 years. It's always funny to be reminded of what the basic premise of this film is, as anyone who has seen it can agree. It's so much more than that by the end. 2003 was a pretty big year for Korean cinema, but Old Boy, thanks to its international success, would serve as the poster child for the bold, genreless filmmaking that was coming out of the country. Despite being a part of a trilogy, I can't even compare Old Boy to other Park Chan-wook films, let alone any other movie out there. That's perhaps what I admire most about it, its effortless originality. Every time I revisit this, I step into a specific type of murkiness that I get so easily sucked into, but can't wait to get out of. Choi Min-sik's performance is unafraid and tragic. The score shouldn't work as well as it does, but it's moving. Movies famous for their twists often risk relying too heavily on said twist, but Old Boy's twist only deepens its central tragedy. It redefines everything you had been watching. It's one of the boldest examples of what came out of this era of film, and it's a film that'll continue to disturb for years to come. My runner-up for 2003 is Los Angeles Plays Itself. There was a point where Pixar was running this damn place. I mean, they still kinda are, but the quality of their films was not up to debate back then. They were just simply some of the most exciting films coming out. And The Incredibles might just be the best one. I go back and forth, but today I'm feeling like this one. Fuck that rat. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The Incredibles is my favorite superhero film. It's also one of my favorite films about family. I find its action scenes to still be incredibly riveting and well crafted. The animation is about as good as it could be for the time, but certain moments like those black blobs that cover Mr. Incredible still look insane. The big band score is peak. When I hear it, I just want to punch a hole in the wall. The humor is still really great. There's so much to love about this movie. I really admire how it's not in your face about the animation. You forget that it's animated, which sounds snobby, but I mean that as a compliment to how great it looks. It's so unconcerned with the animation, which feels so unlike Pixar. It's more concerned with the story for once. I wish there were more animated films that went a more grounded route like this with their ideas. Seeing animation used to make a story the best thing it can be is more exciting than animation meant to make you ooh and ah at the technology. My runner-up for 2004 is actually another animated film, The SpongeBob Movie. Yes, it's also one of the best comedies ever made. End of story. I love Pride and Prejudice. It's an incredible film. But I have to say, 2005 is one of the weakest years for film out there. I mean, what else do we have here? Hoodwinked? Fucking... I'm aware there are a handful of blind spots on my part for 2005 that I probably should have watched before making this video, but to keep it authentic, the most exceptional film I can think of when looking back at this year is easily Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice. What's so impressive about this one, hitting it out of the park for me, is this is not my taste at all. I don't dig period pieces from this era all that much. Traditionally, romantic films don't typically win me over. It just never looked like a movie I had to see, and it proved me wrong in virtually every single way. I wish I had more to say about Pride and Prejudice, but I really just found it wildly captivating and by far the best thing that I've seen out of this year. I'm also glad I saw it before watching Succession, as I don't think I would have been able to look at Mr. Darcy the same way. My runner-up for 2005 is, I kid you not, Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. I really need to watch more movies from this year. Bong Joon-ho, who will come up later on this list, sorry to spoil, made his second best film in 2006, The Host, a film about a sea creature who attacks South Korea after American military personnel dump chemicals in the river. On the surface, especially next to the rest of his films, The Host does appear to be the least serious of the bunch, when in reality I see it as no less political than anything else he's made. I mean, you heard the synopsis, he spells it out for you. It's a pretty scathing critique of government and how it handles a crisis told from the perspective of a family that lives in a tiny snack bar. I'm just now realizing it's the second movie on this list about a pandemic that came out many years before COVID that happened to nail the experience perfectly. I actually watched this right before things got pretty bad in March 2020, so you could imagine my anxiety going into that. No, the VFX for the sea creature haven't aged that well, I can admit that. But the fact that what's happening on screen is already so captivating that the VFX never take you out says quite a bit. It's a damn good movie that I'll never get tired of watching, even if I have really bad associations with it. My runner-up for 2006 is Kelly Reichardt's Old Joy. Oh, they're gonna yell at me for this one, but if you're a real Karst head, you know I have a thing for Smiley Face. I used to call it my favorite comedy ever made. As of recent, I think The Heartbreak Kid by Elaine May might squeak out a little bit in front of it, but this used to hold that top spot, which is an important spot to me, clearly. Smiley Face, directed by Greg Araki, is a stoner comedy about a pothead who gets way too high and has to make her way to the beach. And on her way there, boy does she get into some crazy shenanigans. I could come up with some bullshit reasons for why this is more meaningful than it actually is, but my love for this really comes down to how funny and joyful I find it. Usually, goofy comedies, specifically stoner comedies, don't prioritize style or aesthetic, but I really love the way this thing looks. The bright and colorful exteriors, every time Anna Faris looks right into the camera but is actually dozing off somewhere else. The opening credits sequence apparently inspired the Brat album cover, which some people might hate, but I really love it. Yes, Greg Araki is a fantastic writer and director for so many reasons, but his taste in visuals just really scratches an itch for me, and I think it works really well here. Not to mention Anna Faris delivers one of the best comedic performances of all time. I'm completely serious. She's incredible in this movie. Yes, there are better, more sophisticated films from this year. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just being honest here. Nothing else makes me happy the way this one does, and I think that's a serious achievement. My runner-up for 2007 is Zodiac. Kelly Reichardt has made a lot of great movies. Wendy and Lucy might be my favorite. Wendy and Lucy tells the story of a woman and her dog and what happens when she loses that dog. With Reichardt's films, usually the tone is somewhat laid back, but she's a master at creating drama and tension with the most seemingly inconsequential events. Wendy and Lucy is an exception. This is what happens when the conflict at heart is actually pretty devastating. And every tiny interaction she has in the film following that conflict makes me want to throw my remote at the TV. It gets me so angry. In just a little over 80 minutes, she manages to paint one of the most honest depictions of America, specifically this time in America. But the thing that really sends me over the edge on this one is its ending, which I'm not going to spoil. It's a brave ending, but it's the right one. It both challenges the viewer and makes complete logical sense at the same time. I really love this thing, even if it ruins my day every time I watch it. My runner-up for 2008 is another crowd pleaser, Synecdoche, New York. Whenever someone asks me what my favorite movie of all time is, I usually say Fantastic Mr. Fox, because that's kind of what it is. The real answer changes all the time, but Mr. Fox is just my guy. It's the first movie I ever obsessed over, the first movie that made me love movies, and every year I revisit it, I'm reminded that it really is that good. At this point, I get out of it the kinds of things only someone who has seen something over 50 times can get out of a film. The specific ways Jason Schwartzman delivers some of these lines, the way a tuft of hair moves in the wind, the way a certain piece of music comes in. I truly have the whole thing memorized in my mind at this point. I see it as a film about a lot of things: masculinity, addiction, loyalty, selflessness, community. Wes Anderson does usually have a very unique perspective on the themes he chooses to explore, to a point where you could argue it's inaccessible to a certain audience. And Mr. Fox, more than any of his other films, is able to thoroughly explore a wide range of themes and communicate said themes in such a stripped down way that even a child can feel touched by it. I'm that child. It's a masterpiece, if you can't tell, and I'll love this movie for the rest of my life. I think I can say that by now. My runner-up for 2009 is actually another stop-motion film, Coraline. I probably don't need to be the one to say it, but The Social Network, it's pretty ahead of its time. The Social Network, if you didn't know, is about Mark Zuckerberg and how he built Facebook. It's the kind of movie where the stars just aligned perfectly. Like, of course, someone like Fincher would direct this. It's tailor-made for him. Of course, someone like Aaron Sorkin would excel at this kind of character. Of course, Jesse Eisenberg's performance would be less Mark Zuckerberg and more Jesse Eisenberg, and it works so much better than it would have the other way around for some reason. And I don't even need to say anything about one of the greatest film scores of all time. Get the fuck out of here. I feel like great movies about the American dream are pretty stuck in the past. I can't even think of that many films off the top of my head from the last few years that have attempted this in the modern day. But The Social Network succeeds in ripping open that concept because it comes at it from a pretty antagonistic point of view. The first scene of this thing makes you despise this guy right off the bat, in case you didn't already. And it becomes a story not about an underdog who took over the world, but a narcissist who took over the world because of his narcissism. Every day this thing gets better and better. This is unfortunately a pretty clear representation of this era. My runner-up for 2010 is Four Lions. Lars von Trier's Melancholia is perhaps the only Lars von Trier film that is a complete home run for me. Melancholia is a film that gets more insane the longer it goes on, the more it surprises you. Yet another film that you could argue is well ahead of its time. The film tells the story of a planet hurtling towards the Earth and how two sisters cope with the dread. This film, like any film that incorporates philosophy into its story, risks coming off pretentious or up its own ass. Actually, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been like a certain film from a few years ago. But instead, you end up getting one of the best depictions of depression I've ever seen on film. It is way more straightforward about the topic than you think it'll be, especially for a Lars von Trier movie, who I feel in the past has taken a step back anytime he starts to get close to something personal in his films. But he doesn't here. It's for that reason that this really succeeds at what it wants to do. He leaves it all out on the table, but it becomes a very disturbing, but at the same time cathartic experience because of that. My runner-up for 2011 is actually another film by someone with the last name Trier. It's Oslo, August 31st. It's Such a Beautiful Day is Don Hertzfeldt's directorial debut, and it's about a man named Bill who suffers from several mental issues. Originally a trilogy of 3 shorts, the film clocks in at just over an hour, and if you're wondering if that's enough time for a film to give you an existential crisis, it is. I'll never forget how this thing made me feel. I caught it not in 2012, but in the midst of the pandemic, a real crazy thing to do. Like, to jump into something about someone's mind getting foggier by the day as everything starts to blend together. Interesting choice on my part. Hertzfeldt uses a variety of experimental animation techniques to make something really quite terrifying, in my opinion. I think it may only come off so terrifying because it centers around an innocent stick figure. There's a childlike quality to the art, which only makes the mature themes of mental anguish that much more disturbing. It's a deeply claustrophobic experience that, for as disturbing as it was at the end of the day kind of nice to watch in the midst of the pandemic. I felt less alone by the end of it. It's one of the strongest cases for the power of animation, and is not a film I'll ever forget about. My runner-up for 2012 is The Hunt. Another film that perfectly captures hopelessness and depression is Inside Llewyn Davis. Directed by the Coen brothers, this is a film about a struggling musician who makes his way to Chicago in hopes that it will give him his big break. I liked Inside Llewyn Davis a lot when I first saw it, don't get me wrong, but it's the fact that I've found myself thinking about it fairly often that got me to pull the trigger and put it here. It was a close call between this and Princess Kaguya, but that one's just a little too fresh in my mind. Inside Llewyn Davis is also a very raw depiction of depression, but in a much different way than Melancholia. In Melancholia, it's about the dread, but in Inside Llewyn Davis, things just keep going wrong. There's concrete evidence for why this guy's life sucks. And I hate to get cheesy, but it does its best to answer the question, why go on? Why do we keep going? And unlike the way I set that up, the film explores that question in a way that is not cheesy or sappy at all. It just feels like a big hug by the end. My runner-up for 2013 is The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Whiplash is one of my favorite directorial debuts of all time. Literally was not his directorial debut, by the way. I don't know why I said that. I've seen the other movie. It tells the story of a young jazz drummer who is taken under the wing of a very intense instructor. It's just as unsettling as it is inspiring. Anyone who has pursued the arts or even sports or, well, anything could relate to this film. What I find really interesting about it is how it lays the groundwork for themes Damien Chazelle would continue exploring throughout his career, specifically the idea of pursuing your dreams at the expense of your personal life, to put it as simply as possible. I see this even in First Man, which I initially wrote off as an outlier in his filmography, but can now see as just as similar to everything else. And Whiplash, in ways not unlike The Social Network, captures something in the air about the world that we're currently living in, which is why it resonated with so many people at the time. I love simple movies with simple setups that will leave you digesting their choices for days, in this case, years. The final scene of this film is one of the best of that decade. I see the films before this and those after, and I can't help but call this one pretty influential for that reason. Yeah, you just can't deny this was the best movie of 2014. It's fucking Whiplash. My runner-up for 2014 is Gone Girl. In 2015, I went to see Fury Road with my friend Sam. Completely blown away, I immediately declared it the best movie of that year. Many years have passed since then. I've seen a lot more movies from that year, my palate's expanded, my taste has changed, and Fury Road still leads this year by a long shot. Actually, this year specifically, I realized it's even better than I remember it being. Wow. Fury Road is the fourth film in the Mad Max franchise, and it tells the story of Furiosa escaping a desert fortress with 5 wives in search of freedom. That was a mouthful, but we got through it. Widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest action film ever made, it's not hard to see why. The filmmaking on display is masterful. It's moving at 400 miles per hour, but you never get lost in what's happening. In fact, it's so entertaining, it's hard to believe it's over 2 hours long. I've talked a lot about Fury Road these last few months, so I'm gonna be honest, I'll leave it there. More than most of the films on this list, it's a movie you have to see to believe. There's no use trying to explain it. My runner-up for 2015 is Tangerine. In 2016, I went to film school, and 3 months in, I saw Moonlight, and was like, maybe this wasn't such a bad idea. Yes, while Fantastic Mr. Fox was the film that got me to start paying attention, Moonlight is what sent me over the edge. Ever since this thing, I've considered film to be a very important part of my life. I dedicated my damned career to it. Now, you can have these overly sentimental attachments towards a movie, and it doesn't have to be the best thing ever, But Moonlight is kind of the best thing ever. Told through 3 separate chapters, Moonlight tells the story of Chiron, a young man finding his identity while growing up in Miami. Barry Jenkins directs this film with such tenderness. He brings McCraney's achingly vulnerable story to life in ways that reach beyond the screen. His iconic close-ups lure you in and makes you see these characters in ways they could never put into words. It's the power of film on full display. If he manages to squeeze even the tiniest bit of emotion out of this upcoming Mufasa movie, it'll prove he's one of our greatest living directors. My runner-up for 2016 is La La Land, which is kind of funny. Listen, I'm basing this list on when these films were listed on Letterboxd, and Letterboxd bases these release years based on film festivals. Apparently, First Reformed came out all the way back in 2017, so I'm counting it as 2017. Whatever, let's move on. Paul Schrader's First Reformed tells the story of a pastor who undergoes an existential crisis after an environmental activist kills himself. The film is a masterclass in transcendental cinema, and it happens to be a character piece. What this is a man being eaten alive by fear and paranoia. The mental walls he built up to protect him from reality come crumbling down as he's forced to reckon with the world burning up around him, and the ways in which he's complicit in said burning. This process is not unlike my own experience with this movie. What started as a simply interesting watch evolved day after day into an obsession. It consumed my mind, reshaped how I looked at other movies, at the world around me. Moonlight pushed me over the edge, and this proceeded to obliterate my understanding of how far a film can live with you. It's an experience I'll always treasure. My runner-up for 2017 is Lady Bird. Again, technically 2018, although I've always considered it 2019, Climax, directed by Gaspar Noé, tells the story of a group of dancers who all have a really bad time after drinking spiked sangria. Anyone who has been watching this channel for the last few years will know I have a weird obsession with this film. An obsession I at first denied, then tried to understand, then gave up on understanding and just accepted. To understand how I feel about this thing, just watch the scene of Selva freaking out. That's my experience with this movie. I've talked about this one enough, and similar to Smiley Face, my only arguments for it are personal. It's a movie about all of my own fears and anxieties. It's got some of the greatest bops ever put to film. I love the colors, I love the dancing, I love the camera movements, I love the text inserts, I love practically every bold choice made here. I can understand if you find the 10-minute bird's eye shot to be exhausting and drawn out, or maybe the final 15 minutes where the camera goes upside down. Maybe that sucks. Maybe that's pretty stupid. Maybe all the conversations at the beginning are pretty empty. All I gotta say is that I disagree. Everything feels like the perfect choice to me. The film only works as well as it does because of how long you sit in those conversations, how uncomfortable the upside down camera is, how hypnotic the dancing is to watch. It's a mesmerizing experience that I feel weirdly passionate about. In my opinion, it's a future classic. My runner-up for 2018 is Mandy. In my list of modern films that will be seen as classics, Parasite leads the pack, by far. Parasite was a big deal. It was probably a bigger deal than we even realize. Regarded by nearly everyone who saw it as a masterpiece, the film tells the story of 2 families. On the off chance that you haven't seen it yet, I'm leaving it there. Let's look at 2019 for a second. That was a major year for cinema. I keep telling myself, oh, you're just looking back at it with rose-tinted glasses for being the last year before COVID. But no, it was the year everything changed in film. The peak of Marvel, the rise of A24, Tarantino and Scorsese both making some of their most reflective work. The release of Uncut Gems, which would go on to influence a whole new wave of filmmakers. The last big year for Disney and Star Wars. And then there was Parasite, which represented how far international cinema had come, as well as an appetite for films that critiqued the wealthy. Knives Out also deserves a little credit for that trend, but it was a trend that by 2022 would feel exhausted. And I say all that to really hammer home that Parasite being the undeniable frontrunner from that year just says a lot, you know? In a year of career-defining films, Parasite stood out among everything. It's a masterfully directed film that is comparable to some of Hitchcock's masterpieces. It's genreless and excitingly original in all the ways I described Oldboy as being, but a bit more accessible. It's perfect in every sense of the word. There's not a thing I would change about it. I feel so lucky to have lived through its release. My runner-up for 2019 is a tie between Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Uncut Gems. I can't decide. I'm sorry. Boy, did I not expect this, but as mentioned in my Changed Opinions video, I think I have to call Another Round my favorite movie of 2020. This is a movie about a group of teachers who, for science, drink alcohol at a constant rate to see how it affects their social and professional lives. I don't really know why I've seen this so many times. It's not the kind of thing you need to watch more than once, admittedly. It's less interesting than Vinterberg's other films like The Hunt and The Celebration. It's pretty by the books plot-wise, but there is something really enjoyable about this movie to me. Maybe it's the performances. All the lads at the center of the film have such great chemistry. I believe it to the extent that when things go wrong, I get really, really sad. I like how the film never talks down on the audience. It has a very realistic view on the subject, which, if I really wanted to closely analyze my relationship with this thing, is probably why it hit so hard when it did. In 2020, emotions were high and extreme, and a film that could look at a touchy subject from a heartbreaking and hilarious angle at the same time was just a breath of fresh air. It was a nice watch. My runner-up for 2020 is Kajillionaire. Titane is about a woman who has a strange encounter with a car. And this is basically everything I wanted Julia Ducournau's second feature to be. She takes everything she did in Raw and turns it up to 100. On top of being a great body horror flick, on top of balancing the horror with the dramatic elements supremely well, it's also probably both the coolest and most moving film about gender that I've seen in a while. 2020 was great, all love to Another Round and Kajillionaire, but seeing Titane was the first time since the pandemic where I felt like we were back. To see something this abrasive and confident and forward-thinking just reignited my love for cinema and left me excited to see where things would go from there. My runner-up for 2021 is Red Rocket. In 2022, I called Aftersun my favorite of the year, and while I still have a deep love for it, with time I've come around to thinking Jordan Peele's Nope might just be the one. As I suspected, Nope has aged like fine wine. It's only gotten better in my mind. Talk about forward thinking. What Peele does with the camera is nothing short of breathtaking. The amount of tension he can bring to these wide desert exteriors is pretty insane. Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer both deliver criminally underrated performances. I genuinely can't believe how shut out this was from any awards. It's one of the most original alien films out there. The design of the quote-unquote UFO is enough to call this an all-timer. But what I really love is how much this succeeds beyond what it was set up as. What I mean by that is Peele has been coined as a mindfuck director, someone people expect puzzles from, movies that need to be solved to be understood, because of how witty his smash hit Get Out was. And there's nothing wrong with puzzle movies, but the title kind of implies that once you solve it, you're done with it. You just chew it out and never think about it again. But Nope isn't that. It's not here to blow your mind or anything, even though it probably will. It's one you're gonna think about for a pretty long time. Unlike his others, there's a number of different ways you could look at it. There's no right or wrong way to read Nope. The monkey was an alien. That was my theory, and fuck all of you for trying to say I was wrong. It makes complete sense. I will do a 45-minute breakdown to prove it one of these days, just when I have time. I just love thinking about this movie. I love talking to friends about this movie. I love watching this movie, listening to this movie. It's such a massive achievement in my eyes, and I feel like it's gonna age even better down the line. My runner-up for 2022 is Aftersun. Yeah, May December's still number one. I'll be honest, this and Flower Moon do get out fairly often in my mind, but there's something about May December I find endlessly fascinating and unique. By now, you probably have a decent understanding of my taste in films, and when something can excite me outside of traditional genre norms, it's probably gonna go over well for me. And May December is one of those movies. The film tells the story of an actress who is set to portray a controversial figure and what happens when she visits said figure's home and familiarizes herself with the family. It's an uncomfortable, silly, and tragic story about abuse, control, and performance. I love juicy power dynamics. I love seeing different ways in which characters find power and control in film, especially when that power shifts under your nose. And May December is one of the sneakiest and most satisfying examples of that in recent years. Never in poor taste either. The tragedy is front and center, and it's done expertly through a severely underlooked Charles Melton performance. But Todd Haynes is able to craft a really compelling drama within that tragedy, and by doing that himself in a movie where the main character is on this trip in hopes of doing the same, it turns it into this multi-layered puzzle that never fails to fascinate me. Even if I'm quiet about it, I am still thinking about this damn movie. My runner-up for 2023 is Killers of the Flower Moon, and my favorite film of 2024 is Well, shit, I don't know yet. It could be any of these fools, but I guess we gotta wait. For now, that's all I got. I'll see you in like 10 years when it's time for a part 2. This video turned into a bit of a recap of my own journey with film these last few years, and it was quite fun to look back on. But for now, thanks for watching. Go watch all these incredible films and form your own opinions, and I'll see you in the next one.